So for today's video, I prepared something that I hope you'll find useful, first and foremost, because as I'm coaching more and more people, I find some behaviors that I think are worthwhile to bring to your attention in this video, simply because I believe these are some mistakes that you could avoid. Some are easier than others to avoid, but let's just get to the point here. So on number 8, it's a straightforward one. Many people tend to praise the company that they are applying for too much, especially because 95% of the people that I coach are applying for six-figure jobs. Now the problem with this approach is that pretty much anyone applying for such a role would praise that company. And the second problem is that by the fact that you're a fan of that company, which is self-explanatory, that doesn't tell that interviewer much about your ability to perform. So that's why you should always keep in mind to focus on your strengths and to talk about how can you differentiate yourself from other people, and also very important, what's in for you from all this. Not just that you like the company. The fact that you like the company doesn't mean you're going to be a high performer there, or you're being sufficiently motivated to perform. Number 7, now please don't take this one personally, but people don't work hard for these things. So, and this is, I'd rather put it this straightforward. I'd rather be straightforward here, because I know myself, when I try to get something, I really, to quote from Jack Dorsey, I really work like hell to get it. And I think this is rarely the case. I believe maybe 50% of the people that I coach really look like they've done their job and are really pumped to get the job. Now, of course, you could really have a positive attitude and show that you really want the job, and in your free time not to do anything. But still, I believe it's actually very hard, and you should never assume it's about luck, although it is to a certain extent. But unless you work really hard, I don't think you should have any expectations here. Number 6 here is a very straightforward one. If you've ever worked in consulting roles previously, you'll more likely say, hey, the behavioral part of this interview is something I previously dealt with in my consulting career. I know how to speak, so it's going to go well. The problem is that more often than not, your answers will be triple the time it takes for a great one. That is around 1.5 minutes. So if you have a consulting background, your star answers should be 1.5 minutes. Keep that in mind. Number 5, false positives. I was actually quite impressed about this one, because I wouldn't have expected so many people to be so confident that they're going to be successful in their application. And this usually shows up at the beginning of my coaching sessions, when people are really confident, say, hey, I'm super skilled, I have a successful career they called me in, we must get through this very fast, so just tell me whatever tricks you have, and then we'll move on. And more often than not, these people get rejected in the telephone screening rounds of the interview. I rarely see people get all the way through the on-site loop and have a surprise that the interview went very well and they got rejected. So needless to say, it goes hand in hand with work hard and probably, with a bit of humbleness here. But the fact that you have a successful career is not a substitute for preparing for the interview, for preparing for real and maintaining a humble attitude. Because unless you maintain a humble attitude, trust me, they are very, very good at spotting this, because they are simply not interested to share their office with someone like you. That's the mildest way to put it. And of course, there's also the false positive or the false negative, that you feel like the interview went terrible and you end up with the job offer. But that's a happy scenario, so let's move on. Number 4, people love burning time, including preparing for job interviews. Now, of course, to some extent this is great, because I get my view count on YouTube up, I get more subscribers, and so on and so forth. But now, being honest here, okay, let's say watching YouTube is one of them, but what are other ways that people waste time that are more structurally problematic here? One of them is that to be successful in a job interview, you must be really good at the job that you're supposed to do and really have interpersonal skills these days. What happens often is that I find some people that whom I get in touch with, that they are extraordinary speakers. They know everything about behavioral interviewing. They are 10 times better than myself. So we stay for 1 hour and we go again and again through the behavioral questions that they know and so on and so forth. And then they say, okay, yeah. So, actually I knew I was quite good at this, but probably the technical part is my problem. So needless to say, if you don't know your thing, if you don't know how to get the job done, it makes little sense applying for a job for that role in the first place. So especially at a high-performing company, because they have no interest of ramping you up, technically speaking. They have so much choice. They have an incredible number of candidates applying for these roles, especially because many of these companies prefer to do large acqui-hires nowadays. So they have a ton of internal applicants that are already well qualified for the role. So basically the main takeaway here is that do what you can't, to quote from someone else's motto. So do what you suck at, not what you're doing great at. So yeah, I hope this is clear. Number 3, and somewhat related with number 4, the favorite off-topic question that I get, I actually coach for the behavioral part of interviews, right? The behavioral part, so that people skill, interpersonal relationships and stuff like that, is people asking me, hey Dan, but what if I get asked a technical question for which I don't have an answer to, right? So not only they ask me for a technical, but they ask me a technical question for which I don't have an answer. So this basically tells me that they assume the fact that if I'm good at behavioral interviewing, I'm actually good at turning things around to my way. When in fact that's nonsense. That's completely nonsense. There are some people that go as far as to say if you're good at behavioral interviewing, you're a great liar, which again, it's nonsense still. But let's get back to the first one. So, is it a good idea to turn things into a job interview if you really have no idea what you're talking about, if you really don't have an answer to that question? I would argue with you it's a very bad idea actually, especially for these high-paying jobs. Simply because, if you're straightforward and honest, hey, I don't know, or you say what you know and what you don't know, you'll actually win some time to hopefully compensate for that. And especially for the phone interview, but also for the on-site, you have to be good enough to pass to the next stage. And also for the on-site, okay, you're scored, but you're scored. So if you do 0, or if you do 40% of the total points that you could do on this one, there will be a next question. Or maybe they would want to assess the same thing from multiple points of view. So you will score better in the next question. But by not being sincere and by trying to go above and beyond to satisfy that answer, although you make no sense, I think that's a bad strategy. I think it's a counterproductive strategy, at least in my opinion. But anyway, asking for how to perform, how to do your technical part of interview in a coaching session for the behavioral interview, I don't think that's that's a good idea, needless to say. The second problem that you should really think about, and please listen all the way to the end, because it might not look like something you should consider carefully. It's very rare that people get back to me after a coaching session. And of course, the vast majority of people whom I coach do not get hired. That's just normal. This is the industry. This is how these things work. But I would argue with you this is a mistake. And the reason why I would argue that this is a mistake is actually very much linked with your performance during the interview. Why is this? Well, if you don't get back to me, it simply means that you more likely you took this as a transaction, right? You paid for something, you paid for something to get something in return, and that's it. A strict transaction and life goes on. When in fact, to be honest with you, the main reason why I started that coaching service, besides the fact that I confirmed with upwards of 100 people that it would be a good idea, is not only to help people, but also to help myself. And this is basically the main reason why I'm doing this video. You know, I'm actually monetizing from these things. And even further than this, I have people with whom I get in touch, and I constantly talk about things, how's life going, and you know, there is an exchange here. So despite the fact, I mean, in spite of the fact that I'm on the business side of things, I'm not looking for a job. I know the importance of making friends and building relationships for the long term. I know this, and I didn't learn it the hard way, but I know that I wouldn't have had friends at some critical points in my career, in my business life. It would have been really, really, really tough, right? So going back to the interview, why should you look at this as a journey instead of a destination? Well, that's simply because, you know, to quote from someone from the US, it takes 3 times to get into Amazon. 3 applications usually to get into Amazon. So for me, I would say around 20% of people whom I coached are not applying for the first time for the job at that particular company. So it's very common that this is a journey. This is, you know, a matter of evolution. And the more transactional you look at this evolutionary state, I think the less chances you have to master that process, because you basically learn something this week, you prepare for the behavioral interview, then you fail, then you forget everything, and then probably you'll apply in 2 weeks at a different company, or if you're lucky at the same company, and you'll have to take it all over again, right? It's not the best possible process. And maybe if I didn't convince you thus far that it's a journey, it's not a destination, think about like this: a company such as Facebook, right? They were built on some algorithm, very successful algorithm, same as Google, right? The way they stay profitable is through their people. It's not they invented anything else extraordinary. It's not that first invention that kept them profitable and will keep them profitable forever. It's because they have people of high-performing teams that are capable of advancing their agenda and turning a profit. This is how business works. So it's a people business. So unless you're good at these things, at people skills and building relationships, successful relationships over time, I believe you are missing out, to be honest with you. And again, I'm including the fact the scenario where you have an unsuccessful application. I would argue with you, it's especially if you're unsuccessful in your application, to talk, to have conversation, because actually I'm seriously considering of starting a service with people that got rejected for the job interview, whom I liked, which I could probably recommend to other jobs in other roles, because, you know, I mean, there are not that many companies for whom I coach people, and, you know, with some of these companies I have some contacts there. So please consider this seriously. Whenever you prepare for something and whenever you have an exchange, it's a journey, it's not a destination there. All right. And finally, the most important thing that I want to talk about here is, sadly, many people that come to me and talk to me are spending a lot of time telling me how bad their existing role is, or how bad their existing manager or previous manager was to them, or telling me how hard is life and how hard is their current situation. And, you know, again, with risking of showing a serious lack of empathy here, I would just say this: I'm not a therapist, and I believe it's a very bad idea to tell me this. Of course, I like to empathize with people, but it's a very bad idea. It's a very counterproductive idea. And if in the beginning this sounded like okay, let's listen, to what people have to say. I was just curious what's going on. I realized it's actually a very bad idea to listen to these things, because no one wants to deal with negative people, and no one wants to hire negative people. And it doesn't make any difference if you tell me that you don't like your boss, if you don't like your current job for your for the application process. And in fact, I'm actually wrong here. It does matter, because the more you talk about it, the more likely you are to become what you talk about it. That is a negativist, a pessimist, and a depressed person. And I know, this sounds very negative, but this is the reality. This is the main reason why these companies have so many interviewing steps, because they want to weed out bad people. And or if you're depressed, if you are a pessimist, or if you're passing through a rough patch in your life, you will be a very bad investment for them. And when I say bad investment for them, I would say millions of dollars at least. Because in the first place, they would hire you instead of someone else. That's a whole hiring process. And otherwise, in the first 6 months on the job, it will not be very hard for you to to take away some people, some other people, some good employees from that company. So again, if you have depressions, if you're passing through a rough patch, and if this is the case, I'm sorry for you, but please look for professional attention. I'm not a psychologist. I cannot give you professional advice on how to get out of these things. So even no matter how much I would like to. And maybe one last note here. Even if people don't tell me that they are passing through some rough times in their career and while considering for a new role, it's more often than not that it becomes obvious from their attitude in the interviewing process. Furthermore, if you start talking about how tough life is, I think you completely disqualify yourself. But if you even if you don't talk about it, but you show a certain trend of negativism in your answers, I think that's also a very worrying sign, at least. So the main takeaway here is that apply for a job when you're prepared to apply for it. And as I said all the way in the beginning of this video, work hard towards it, do whatever it takes to do it, and do what sells, actually, show as a productive person, show as an optimist. And of course, you should be an optimist, you should be curious, you should have a continuous ability to learn new things, and maybe show more empathy for people, instead of just saying how hard life is. And you'll basically get a fair shot here. So very, very careful on the psychological side of things, because I believe this is one of the most underestimated aspects in any job interviews. And you could score very well both on the technical, both on the behavioral side, so long as you're a negativist, or you cannot be a negativist and score well on the behavioral side. But still, try to be very, very careful at the attitude, at the energy that you try to that you're transmitting throughout these exchanges. So yeah, maybe this video took a bit long, maybe these last 2 points took a bit long, but I really believe that they are very important to highlight, because actually it's not the first time that I talk about these things, but they continues to come up, and I believe it would be a pity not to share this information with you, as hard as it is, to share these things, because I mean, everyone passes through rough times. I'm no stranger from these things. So there you go. I hope you found at least some of these pieces of advice useful in maybe your next application process. And as always, thank you very much for watching.